My name is Chris Hutchins. I'm from Northwell Health in New York. Big health system. We're scattered across Long Island and downtown Manhattan. 23 hospitals, about 900 outpatient facilities. I'm a little bit more worried about actual intelligence in terms of how we operate than I am concerned about AI. We definitely have folks that are interested in doing that, and I think they're doing some good foundational work, but I think I've got a bit to learn from my colleagues. And so we'll just start off, and I'll just ask Eli if you want to introduce yourself and let folks know what your role is in introducing AI and ML in your organization.
Sure. Everyone can hear me? Cool. My name is Eli Goldberg. We've all talked earlier before. Thank you guys for sticking around. I'm the VP of Applied Data Science at Current Health. And in many ways, Current Health is not new to the AI journey, but certainly there are many aspects of machine learning and data science that are not yet explored. So a lot of my work is to really accelerate this intersection, not only in terms of creating credible value statements, credible business cases with AI, but the functional advancement of AI and development and scaling of AI in interesting ways as we work with providers, with payers, with health systems, as well as pharma.
Awesome. There?
Hi everyone, Varun Gupta here. I'm the VP for Data Analytics at BILH, Beth Israel Lahey Health, and it's in Boston. So when you go out of the buildings, you might see a couple of hospitals just on your way to en route to any of the other places. I've been in the health system for almost 6 months. Came from New York after working in Sinai for a few years, and BILH is sort of started coming together in 2019. So it's a group of 14 hospitals now, newly from integrated health systems. So as you might imagine, there is a lot of work that is happening on the operational side. So getting on the single ERP systems, getting on the single EHR system, so on and so forth. And in terms of the AI, in terms of the being more futuristic, there has been a lot of work that has happened individually within the hospital systems, which are at very different maturity level. So one of the things that is always there is how you take the work that has happened in one of your hospitals and has scaled well, and now build it for an integrated health system from a single hospital. How you calibrate the models, so on and so forth. So while there has been a lot of focus on setting the system up right, having that identity of an integrated health system, there are pockets where you need to have sort of you can call it a lane that's running in parallel, where you can be more futuristic going forward. So that's what I have been doing here for the time I've been around. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. Besa.
Yeah, speaking of New York traffic, when you calculate that it's like 3 hours, sometimes the GPS doesn't always calculate correctly. Talk about algorithms. Mm-hmm. So, hi everyone, my name is Beth. I'm the Chief Data Analytics Officer for Texas Department of Children and Family Services. Yes, I'm all the way here from Texas. I'm originally a New Yorker. So what have I been doing there? Right now, sort of taking the lay of the land, trying to modernize a lot of the state legacy systems, including building, different level applications, sort of dipping the toe of the state agencies to AI and ML systems. It's definitely fairly new. Usually government is very conservative regarding applications of new technologies, but we do see a value as far as ROI, implementing different types of approaches, especially where we serve quite a few folks in the state. So that's where we are.
So continuing on this vein, you kind of touched on this already, but having the perspective coming from a role in New York where you were doing some pretty cool stuff with data science and AI, mm-hmm. Now moving to Texas, you're kind of starting over again. Talk to us a little bit about how did you really approach this with the leadership team? How did you get them prepped to start to understand what you were talking about and why this is an important thing for them to consider and support?
So I have an amazing team. I don't think I able to do anything that I can right now without having an amazing team. But an important component is sort of getting buy-in from the executive leadership. When I was brought in, it was primarily as a change agent for the state agency, including supporting other state agencies to adopt different types of novel technologies. I did that in New York. There was different proof of concepts that had a large ROI in the healthcare and human service sector. So application of that in a state system that has a lot of legacy systems, a lot of integrated systems is difficult to do. So, and then what I realized is that the buy-in came from the top, but the most important thing is the middle management, those folks that are really hard to change. They're caltrained, they're built into a lot of the processes that have worked for many, many years. One of the things that I've started doing is actually having conversations across the state and trying to figure out what are the pain points. When I talk about data governance, when I talk about analytics, I don't talk about those things because no one really cares. When they see me, they're like, I have this problem, how are you gonna solve it? The tools are secondary, but addressing those problems and their needs is primary. So coming at them and sort of being pretty open to understanding the lay of the land and saying, okay, what are your issues? How can we address it? What's working, what's not working? Because what I don't want to do is throw out the baby with the bathwater and sort of say, hey, I have these really cool new AI technologies and everyone's going to buy the Kool-Aid. That doesn't work, especially with large systems that there's a lot of investment. So what you want to do is have incremental change, have use cases. So pick a problem that's really high level, high visibility, and tackle that. If that goes well, pray that it goes well, sometimes it doesn't. Then they are your advocates, and that's what we have done. We started building a couple of algorithms, sort of testing the water, seeing how it is, and getting the buy-in from our stakeholders to see, does this work? And it's working so far, so they are our advocates, across the state.
Yeah, I think it's always interesting. There's an exercise, you have to develop some skills to communicate in a way that someone wakes up one morning and think they had a great idea, right?
You plant the seeds
it's inception.
and let them grow.
Right.
It's your idea.
The key to executive, let's say, influence is helping them discover that idea you made is actually their idea.
Beautiful. So talk a little bit about that, because there's definitely an art form. There's not a great manual. I mean, every executive you talk to is going to be different. So you have to figure out how to feed them the right, the right course, the right
Case example scenarios.
right serving size. There we go.
Yeah. I mentioned this before, but I think the reality is most executives on some level care about money. They care about ROI. And depending on how the business makes money, those are very easy levers to manipulate with. And oftentimes the question becomes, cool, you don't have to invest, but if you do, here's this big pile of opportunity that's got your name on it. And if you don't, then you're the one who left it on the table. And sometimes it's a bit of a left hand or right hand. But fundamentally, great ideas are some of them are specious, right? Good ideas, plausible interventions fail all the time.
Right.
So there's a very fine line between, being, let's say, personally on the hook for something and then helping to incept an executive leader. A lot of the reasons why companies like BCG and McKinsey are so successful is in many ways, and they're very smart, filled with very, very smart people, don't get me wrong, but they give executive leadership a little bit of breathing room to make hard decisions because, McKinsey said it, BCG said it, Deloitte said, I think this decision is okay. But the reality is it comes down to the business case.
Right.
And really incepting that is about understanding how the business makes money and positioning the value that way.
Awesome. I want to come back to the value component to this in a bit, but Varun, another one of my colleagues that's made a switch from one health system to another, the differences in executive style, what they need to, from the way that you communicate. How have you approached it, even in your new role? I know they've kind of launched this whole effort into integrating. I can't even speak about this. I'm about to deal with it myself, and so I'm a little nervous about this. But we're going to be implementing a whole new EMR, revenue cycles platforms, and all that, and it's massive. So that's one of the things you got to walk into, but balancing that and the technologies that we should be employing to really start to do AI and ML. How are you approaching it, and what's the difference in style that you're experiencing?
It varies. It varies place to place. It varies from executive to executive, and I think it's really just understanding what their chain of thought is and how their priorities are for the next few years looks like, and then you sort of align what you're trying to do with their vision. And like Lahey said, these are very smart people in their own domains. They understand what they need, how technology works, so on and so forth. But I think in a lot of places we are coming, at times we are coming from, I understand how this works and this is how we need to approach this. And sometimes the conversation helps where this is the 5-year roadmap, this is how you need to get there, right? But those conversations don't really help in all the scenarios and with all the folks that are on the table. Sometimes I think what you mentioned about is the incremental that I really look for. So it's like, what is the next thing that you can make better, which also aligns to your 5 to 10 year roadmap. So in your head, while you understand how the 5-year roadmap looks like, it does not always gel with bringing it out on the table and displaying it. This is my 5-year with the AI. This is how it's going to work. Does not work in every room. So you just have to approach it incrementally and say that, yes, I understand on back of my head, this is the 5-year looks like, but this is 2-year, this is 3-year. And when you get there after 5 years, then a lot of people understand that journey. Oh, that's how we got there, right? So that's a long journey out there. Plus there is the proof of concept kind of a thing, which I usually call those labs or incubators, which you need to start within the organizations. These are very small teams with few folks who might be working with either on their own or with some of the tech companies. I think this is where a lot of technology companies are ready to come to the table, where they want to experiment with you and see if something works. So you gradually understand and build those use cases which have a use into the clinical or the financial side, and then start implementing them step over step. But there's no, Chris, there's no easy sauce. You might sort of relate to that. There's like every person is different, how you sort of approach them and understanding how their chain of thought is. That's the key.
I want to say something. I mean, I agree with you, Varun, but I don't think our executives understand how the technology works. A lot of them are not in the nitty-gritty. Yesterday, I had a large cybersecurity meeting, and I was brought in as I was a previous CISO in my life. I was brought in, and we had our executives there, and we're talking about teletraffic and honeypots and phishing, and that's not what they got. They're like phishing, and at one point, our executive stopped, and she's like, you guys have a whole new lingua franca. I have no idea what you're talking. I'm thinking phishing different than the phishing that you're talking about. Traffic is definitely not the traffic on 35, right, from like one of the brick highways. Honeypots, she's thinking about it. I'm like, no, they're containers, like different types of, completely different language. So I think a lot, business speaks a different language, and that's where our role is being sort of like the translators in between, that I had to explain to her, honeypot doesn't mean pot of honey. It means this is a technology that gets associated with something else. So I think our role is to be that, provide executives lingua franca that says, the technology is not as important. Yes, we have team of engineers, data scientists, and other that can unlock that for you. But for you, is that how is this technology going to address that problem? Whatever the technology, and there's multiple vendors out, multiple technologies that can, address that problem. And sometimes it's finding the right technology for the right problem, the right fit.
You know what I think the lingua franca for most executives is dollars.
It depends. Now, state systems are very different, so you have to be very cognizant.
What you get for $1 may be different.
That's the value. So I think the value add is different.
But I think, in terms of the translation, I'm curious to hear, Texas is, it's Texas, right? I would love to hear you say,
hey, there's still some Texicans here.
Born in Houston, Texas, so I feel like I get to say this. I've lived in Austin, I've lived in Houston, worked in both in the oil and gas industries, and multiple countries. I think that there's variation in this sort of like risk level. And I think Texas...
But that's by industry, though.
But
it's
by
not,
industry,
you can't just say
but also
like entire
geographically.
straight. We have Elon Musk right down the street. So as far as technology...
he's on Mars, right?
He's on Mars,
sure.
yes, that's true. But so is Apple and Google right down the street as well.
He's talking to Putin. I don't know if we should bring, Elon into this. But I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on the relative, if there is a geospatial difference between the way that you tend to influence with executive leadership in New York, where you were very successful, versus Texas, like how do you view those challenges and how?
See, I don't think it's a monolith. We have some really great, there are some in this room, there are amazing executives. They're cutting edge, bleeding edge of tech, in the state. Same thing in New York. I had some folks that were using Excel sheets, the bane of my existence, just taking away their sheets and even paper, God forbid, I took away their paper. Started screaming and crying saying, I just need a copy just to make sure it's there. So I think it varies by industry. And varies even within an organization, you're going to have variation. So I don't want to just, like with a brush stroke that say, like everybody's the same. I've seen some really amazing folks here. It's just sometimes the external environment that limits what you could do because the way the system is set up or the structure. So you cannot innovate or iterate at a faster pace. It's not as agile because it requires budgeting and approval, state senate financing. So if you're any sort of state system, you're going to have a 2-year delay. You're like, I'm ready to go. They're like, hold off. Right. 2 years in the future.
No, you raise an interesting point. So in my own organization, different executives think about things very, very differently. Some of them want to check a box so they can talk to their colleagues in their network. We're doing AI and ML.
They don't
we're
even
doing
know
big
what it
data
is.
and predictive. They don't need to understand what it is. They just want me to reaffirm, yes, we're doing some of these things and maybe give them just a drop or two of what some specifics are. But then we've got some that really want to dig in, and some of them are actually pulling me and my team along.
Oh, those are horrible.
Right? But there are differences, and there's a lot of nuance to that. We started to go there a little bit, but I want to kind of get you guys to think about this from a healthcare perspective. I mean, that's healthcare and pharma, that's kind of our focus at the moment. How do we get our organizations comfortable in a way that we can start to maybe test a few more things, experiment a little bit more, and take a little bit more risk, where our counterparts in other industries seem to be far more comfortable with it? And I know there's a lot of barriers, regulations and such. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on how we have to approach it and what are the big challenges we have to be paying attention to and how we're going to overcome them.
Yeah, everybody. I mean, like, what
We're all
a great
risk-averse.
question. And I wish I had some answers for you.
Well, that was one of the ones I wanted to get an answer for my own benefit.
We don't have challenges. So
Yeah,
what
well, I
are
mean,
you talking
no
about?
one's ever said no to me.
Really?
No,
I want to be in your
God, no.
shoes.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, there's, and I don't pretend to speak for the state agencies. I really haven't worked as much as you at all with them. But I think, in every business there are different things. I mean, it seems like the value proposition, whether it be clinical or impact, that sort of investment thesis that a company has about where they want to play their chits, where they want to put their, place their bets, I think is very hard to understand and to reconcile and to make impact. I mean, I've found great success in convincing organizations that are fundamentally for profit, which is very different than state agencies and other things. And ultimately, I think the value cases to be made there are very similar, but it's not easy. Whether it's impact, whether it's fear of missing out. Hey, what else? Tufts is doing this. Beth Israel is doing that. Like the Harvard healthcare system. And where do you want to be in this pack? I think that there's some behavioral psychology there that I also don't pretend to know. But I do think that that most folks, particularly at the executive level, are motivated by a want to help people. And if they can find a way to make business work and sort of kill two birds, not that I want to kill birds, maybe really bad expression, even new colloquialisms. If you can message two birds with the same tweet, I don't know, maybe there's a better
That's a better one.
I tried, it's off the cuff, but I tried. Maybe that's a good thing, but I think that there's fundamental differences that are really hard with an executive trade-off in terms of sort of visibility, comparison to the market, like what does winning mean, like, how is perception with like, okay, I need to keep the lights on. I need to do other things. So there's a bit of a mishmash of things, but.
Well, jumping on the perception point.
I was going to say the same thing. The perception is important.
Varun, we have the persona that probably is the most glaring that we have to pay attention to is the patient, right? So how does that influence how you're thinking about it and how you lean into some of the things you're thinking would be the right choice versus, this is going to be a little bit harder to sell?
I think what I've found is always more often than not, the use case driven ideology that works, whether it's on the hospital finances or it's on the clinical side or it's in the patient side. To take an example, we want to do something because it reduces length of stay, right? Now, Lahey, you mentioned about the dollar numbers earlier, right? And it directly links to that. And a lot of times I think health systems are mature enough to have the tools in place to tell them, what is going to be the impact if I reduce my length of stay on certain type of patients, on how the revenues are working, how the patient health is going to be impacted. All those factors are in play. From a revenue cycle standpoint as well, we understand, this is what the health system is losing in terms of reimbursements, denials. So if you are having the use cases which are specially focused on, we have this use case, it's going to reduce the denials. They know it's a 300 million problem for a health system per year, so on and so forth. So they know, they would have an idea of how much money we want to put on the table to do that kind of a use case going forward. If you're talking about labor productivity, say we have a model which can predict how many nurses that you need in a certain time, month over month, or how we can stagger that and sort of be better at labor productivity. Those the hospital finance people really understand that aspect from a dollar figure standpoint, in a hindsight. Otherwise, there are tools now in place which can give an idea about how your reimbursement revenues, right from charge and billing right up to the analytics, how it's going to work, how the financial goals need to be set up. So if you're trying to align those use cases along with how it's going to have an impact on the use case, and I think in analytics we all know it's not always possible to put a dollar figure on a certain use case. That's never possible. But I think once you put that use case out, the folks that are going to make that decision, the CFOs and the other leaders in the health systems, they understand how big the problem is and what the value is for the health system, and that's how the decisions are made more often than not.
I like what you said as far as focusing on the patient. Sometimes we focus on the system, we focus on everything, and I have a motto that I tell my team that says, in service to the field. And what I see that individual child and family that's at risk. Yeah. So whatever we do is, to ensure that their clinical pathway is optimized. So if I'm coming in, and this is my personal experience, or experiencing, treatment for my family and a close family member, I saw how discombobulated, how antiquated, you have to jump through multiple hoops. I went to one hospital, enter your information, transfer to Memorial, enter your information yet again. And I'm like, why can't they all just talk to each other? Right. And I'm a sophisticated person there. I'm like, show me your Epic. Tell me exactly, what your data flows are. In the meantime, providing care for my family member and also advocating for a screwed up system in a lot of ways. So a lot of the executives sort of focus on ROIs, our processes, our finances, and what they lose is the service to the patient or the client. So in our approach is really putting the focus on the individuals that are receiving services, as well as our providers, because those are key group of folks that are at downstream that see some of the process inefficiencies, and supporting them. So it doesn't have to be a big AI ML application, but providing the right information at the right time. I think one of our staff was like, why can't you just have a Google function? I could just get on my phone and just search. Why can't you do that for our EHR instead I have to sit through 5 different windows to get to where I need to go to find the history of the patient? Why can't we just have a summary of the history of the patient that kind of outlines all the key indicator risks as well as strengths? And then that way I don't have to search. I'm able to sit there. Usually payment is like 15 minutes. So even as a provider, the client comes in, 15 minutes, I'm like, time's up, next one down the line. What can you do in 15 minutes?
And I think
you've hit a couple of things that I think are really important. And I think as organizations are dealing with the whole push on digital transformation, I've kind of been trying to influence the leadership team to
They're losing sight of the
preference, put a preface on this thing. It's not just digital transformation, it's meaningful digital transformation. And I think that's where we've got to pay attention, because there's a lot of friction for the patient in their experience and how they interact with us as a healthcare provider. And there's a lot of friction for the provider, where we've done all this great technology and
The adoption is
all over the place, I guess would be the nice way to put it. But the challenge with that is all the things that we've put into the workflows for the provider to make sure that we're getting the documentation right so we can drop a bill. We've added a ton of administrative responsibility that actually is misattributed. It's really part of the clinical care. So there's initiatives popping up all over the place, like the concept of getting our providers home for dinner, having a scribe actually in the room, either automated or a physical person, documenting the communication between the doctor and the patient.
So they're present.
Yeah, so it gets back to what's the core mission that we're there for. But then there's the other aspect of it, and forgive me for bringing it up, but I think it's something that I think I'm worrying about it, and I'm sure you guys are too. GDPR is going to become something that we've got to contend with.
It's not a bad
Right?
thing.
No, it's not. But that being said, how are you guys thinking about that? And particularly when you're dealing with having to use vendor solutions, where you've got to put, whether it's de-identified or not, you've got to give them some relevant clinical information if we're really trying to address healthcare. Who wants to go?
Well, we have a European company, so we already deal with GDPR.
Well, do tell.
Was Kenny here? Maybe he could tell, The reality is it's really hard. It takes a lot of extra effort and money, but it's pay to play, right? Like you have to do it in order to play in those spaces. And honestly, I kind of like GDPR because the concept of HIPAA is fairly confusing, right? Like pharma data is not HIPAA compliant, doesn't fit the bill. There's lots of misunderstanding in HIPAA. It's an insurance-based policy. It's fundamentally discriminatory in weird ways, difficult to manage and expensive. I just want, I would love just one way to manage it, but the concepts of privacy and security in GDPR are about people. And fundamentally, I think it's in their rights. I think I'm okay with it. It's going to be a problem. It's more for you than for me. Look, there are certain sacrifices that I think we all need to be willing to make that will hit margin. This has to be one of them. I just have no qualms about spending the money or the time to do it.
Sorry,
Go ahead.
I'm just so for privacy regulation, California is actually coming up with their updated California Protection Something Act, which I can remember the acronym. New York has the SHIELD Act. Across the board, almost everybody has these, protections for individuals, and I look at that as a positive thing. I want my healthcare system to ask me what are they going to do with my information. But if they're forthright with me, that I'm more than willing to share if it's going to benefit the population, if it's going to benefit future generations with drug discovery. That's what it is, in a way, being very transparent right from the get-go that says, yes, we're collecting this information. It's going to be used for your clinical care, but we would also like to use this information for X, Y, and Z. You're going to run into individuals that are very risk adverse. They're like, nope. Unless they live under a rock, almost all of our information is being shared because you're sharing it right now. There's a lot of data out there. So if you explain it that way, where you're basically explaining if you have an iPhone or any sort of phone, you're sharing your location information because you're getting a benefit out of that. So what is the cost benefit for sharing your information? What do you get? And companies do this all the time. You sign those EULAs like there's no tomorrow. Has anyone ever looked at a EULA? Really? You have? You're the only one. Really? When you download the app, you look at the user agreements?
It's companies that benefit. It's the companies that benefit. It's not the people. I think one of the greatest failings of data and interoperability these days is actually that without incentivization and real incentivization for people to share their data and understanding and to be able to reap the benefits of the models and other things.
But there's tangible, intangible benefits, though. The companies will always, because they're there
tangible
to make
benefits
business.
for a company, right?
But if you're downloading the Google Maps, even though this morning it was horrible, I had to download Apple and then Google. Google was a little slightly better. But you're getting something out of that. So what I'm getting is
right.
If
you don't know what you're getting, you're the product.
They're getting, obviously, money, revenue, whatever, but I'm getting a service. So there's always a give and take.
No, I agree. It's the willful acknowledgement of that give and take. And,
Bingo.
And I think obviously there's a certain, it's like, I don't know, this is like really weird to say at a big conference, but have you ever heard of like the pooled, like dead body phenomena, where effectively like there's a pool size in which you're comfortable being in that pool with a dead body, right? Like at some level.
Well,
like
I'm never
if you're in the ocean,
comfortable
you're like,
just because I have public health background.
yeah,
I'm like,
people
no.
have died in the ocean. Like I'm fine swimming in the ocean. At some level, like people are okay giving away some fraction of their data, but there's
Yeah.
this mysterious line, this like pool phenomena. My pool's very large. Don't want to be in a pool, whatever. But like the reality is I think.
What if you have sharks and other kind of
I think
animals that
that
kind of eat
helps,
the
like,
dead body?
more,
Then
the
see
more
la vie.
bioturbation that happens in general, like the cycle. I just watched The Little Mermaid with my kid. Anyway, so like just very top of
Thinking
mind
about
for
pools.
me. Very very top of mind. But I think the problem is that there's this willful like. I think unwillful acceptance, or maybe forced acceptance of the need for these services that puts that data in a really weird spot. So
that's why GDPR and these things,
I agree.
can support. It's
I
going
agree.
to hit the companies that have to play and figure out how to do this and inform constituents. So
Agree.
a readable EULA, user agreement that,
One of the things that our researchers have just started to roll out is it's essentially an opt-out education packet. So when a patient's checking into one of our facilities, they have a really brief overview of it. They give them some links to videos if they're not comfortable to make the decision there.
Love
But it's
that.
very, very concise videos that explain to them what their contribution means to medical science and the potential outcomes that could be impactful in the area that they're receiving their care. So if we're in oncology, we kind of tailor the messaging so that they understand that.
how many have opted out?
Not that many.
See?
But it's just understanding that the critical component in the role that we have to play is we have to become educators, and we can't put that burden on the providers.
No.
We've got to educate frontline staff, and we have to incentivize them to start working on those things so that they're contributing as well. But it's definitely a component to what we have to take responsibility for. In the retail space, it's in the fine print. You click right through it, you set up your accounts, and everybody's got access to your stuff, and you don't think about it again until you hear about a breach somewhere. But
All the time.
in the healthcare space,
I've never read a EULA, by the way. I've never read a EULA, not once. I just blindly.
He's the only one that
blindly
has.
accept.
I'm kind of
It's
shocked.
impressive. It's impressive.
Probably.
and I don't think I've actually read thoroughly an instruction manual on anything in my life either.
Me neither, or the policy is like.
That's why my couch looks like a Jackson Pollock.
No, where are we time-wise? Well, I want to maybe take a question or two from the audience before we wrap, because I'm sure there's people who have some things that they'd like to hear from you guys about. We'll start here.
The first sacrificial lamb.
Thank you so much for the talk. But I want to ask a question about this point, the last point of data. As we give the data for information or for a service, I give my localization for a service to guide me. Okay, thank you. I give my localization to guide me, but health data is different from localization. So how an organization can make aware of because people won't share their health.
They're much more protective of their health data.
Protective.
But
They are more protective. So how can we make people share those health data that is it's too personal than just a localization or who's my friend in Facebook?
So I always like to think of what is the benefit to that individual and what is the social benefit. So when I couch that, if I'm also a researcher, if I bring in individuals to say, we're collecting this information, but the information that we're going to use is that if you have that condition, if you're sharing that information, then what's going to happen is that hopefully we'll come with a cure down the line so others can benefit. Not all of them have social responsibility. Not everybody is sort of, that type of, and that's okay. That's okay. There's different people, different flavors. If you don't share your data, so be it. There's others that will. So the issue is that you have to have in public health sort of enough individuals sharing that information to approximate population level variables. So, and then you don't want to skew. For example, if there's individuals of different minority groups, they're not sharing versus others that are sharing. What you don't want to do is have that disproportionality kind of increase in your data, because your interventions need to be tailored to your population. So, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just.
No, you go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was just saying that there's an irony to that, because if you look at the benefit versus how you healthcare data is we need to protect the data, but if you look at just the social benefit you're talking about, the finding the actual care pathways for cancer treatments, or how say a newly found biologic is going to work for a certain DRG. Those are like really those benefits everybody wants to reap on. So you might find it strange, but not many patients are actually unwilling to share the data. They do want to share the data. I would say even like 95+%. It's just a matter of being able to have enough awareness and the collaboration between the entities who are going to use that data to be able to get to that to the value proposition. And it's happening, but we just need to do a lot more of that. So the organizations are in play who are working on getting the de-identified data from the provider organizations with the consent of the patients and the other parties in play. It just has to be done more and more, and when we see enough of the awareness and enough of work being done there, then we'll actually start seeing the incremental benefit that comes out of it.
Yeah, I think the critical component, though, is we have a tendency in healthcare to look at the data we generate. That's a big mistake in this space. We have to understand what's happening in the communities that we're there to serve, and a lot of that information it comes from economics. Well, there's social determinants of health. The access to pharmacies, good quality food, all of those things. We have to do the homework and understand those things, because those things also have a lot to do with culture. Is another one. Religion is another one. Why people might be reluctant. And so if we're going to educate them properly so that they have an educated decision they can make, we have to do our own homework in that space and not be afraid to use external data to understand our communities, not be afraid to engage with the municipalities and religious organizations in those communities. I think there's a partnership that has to be formed. Population health is not going to be happening by healthcare providers doing it alone. We've got to do that in partnership with the communities and the organizations that are a part of it.
I think Varun, you said one thing that's important is that if I'm giving you my data, then there's the responsibility on the organization to not only secure it, but also use that information responsibly, because misuse of information is where the trust kind of erodes. Yep. And understand that if I'm entrusting you with this information, that the right people have access in the right ways, that this is not going to end up in the dark web and everybody else will have access to it.
Right. Here's a business idea. Find a way to make profitable the sharing of your data between an individual and create an incentive, maybe it's economic, maybe it's clinical, to complete this really sparse care that we have in our data, right? If you can incentivize someone to voluntarily give up their data for a benefit, maybe that's cash, maybe that's a clinical impact, I don't know, but that can provide incredible downstream opportunity. And so if you can find a way to make that incentivization on both sides, both from the people wanting to use this data downstream, maybe this is a Web3 idea, I don't know. But I think that the promise of AI, the promise of data in healthcare will always remain, let's say, distant without incentivization and without the willful connection of data between sources. I mean, look at this stage. Like, no one here is incentivized to share data with each other.
No,
I think it has started to happen from an organization, from technology to the provider. But what you're saying, it has to get to next level from provider to the patient.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
I mean,
both, but yes.
COVID was a good example of state agencies sort of sharing information, but they were not set up. So for us,
they did a bad job at it, I think.
Okay.
But we can fight about that later.
I agree and disagree, maybe in the beginning. But the systems weren't set up to share that information.
Agreed.
So I think it's not willingness a lot, it's just the infrastructure that's set up. The US healthcare system is very complex compared to others. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Yeah. Any VCs or funders here who want to fund that idea?
What?
I agree.
I have some contact.
Okay, cool. Good talk.
But it's a Web3 idea, that's for sure. You need to give bitcoins or something.
Yeah, but I mean, look, my portfolio is way down now. I don't want to talk about it.
We've got a couple questions here. We're getting close to the time.
Have we talked too much? I feel like this group we're good for that. Yeah, guys.
Yeah, we're yappers.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So my question is related to your topic. One of the things that I have faced in healthcare organizations when we go and implement our system, at the user level as well as the decision or the business level, they believe that AI As soon as you implement it, gives results. Now, AI is a learning tool. It has to learn. The more data you feed it, the more human in the loop, the better it gets if you have the right algorithms. And the precision and recall early on is low, but it'll improve, but they don't have the patience. How do you prepare your teams internally that this is not a dumb software? This is like a child which will learn and then really, give ROI like no tomorrow.
It's actually comparable to the practice of medicine. We forget sometimes they're all still learning,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, also there's a fundamental dispersion between, clinical impact lags behavior change and financial impact lags clinical impact. Like biologically you have to shift, that takes time. And the healthcare system is really no different. So if it's truly a matter of time, and it may be, most payers, I don't know if there are folks from payers here, you are really negatively incentivized to do preventative care because 30% of your book every year walks out, right? If 30% of people on Aetna now they're going to, United, why would I pay for them? It's really tricky to make it. So part of it is you need to make a fiscal case that makes sense in the time horizon that's valuable for your business. But yeah, that's a hard problem.
Also, I think when we look at the implementation of AIs within the organization and the concept of having a child who's going to learn, there's also another alternative or the parallel path of working with the partners who have done that with 25 health systems and they have the models. So it's somebody else is actually raising the kid, so you're bringing an adult to the shop. And that's where it's a ROI and speed to the market happens, and it does happen. So we don't always have to think about AI. I'm going to build something on my own and stand up a team, and that's going to do this kind of an approach.
I like the idea of my colleague had a 2 or 3 year old son, so I'm like, he's AI in development. In a few years, he's going to surpass a lot of the algorithms that we have. And I think it's just level setting that they're just tools. AI is not magic, especially with explainable AI, that you can look under the hood. It's just algorithms and programming. It's going to get much more sophisticated. Obviously, with scale, it becomes, there begets complexity. But I think going back to your sort of question is kind of level setting and saying, yes, these tools are here. They're not panacea. There's also fine-tuning this as the algorithm learns, sensitivity, specificity, depending on where you're deploying it for what type of, if it's radiological detection, what is the value add of having that, tool in practice?
So
Okay.
my question is not on AI that you are developing internally, but vendors like us, when we bring it in.
Yeah.
What I have experienced over and over again is they don't have any concept.
Who's they?
Beg your pardon?
Sorry, who's they?
The healthcare system?
The
or?
healthcare system.
Okay.
Yeah, So, and the expectation is, why is it not working? From day 2, no matter what. And it just is, it takes a long time. The friction, the abrasion goes through the roof, not only for the physicians, but even for the non-clinical staff. So I think one of the things I would like to see is, people like you who work in the healthcare on the provider side, put those foundations, because then rolling out, if you get it done earlier, better, but be prepared.
We have the same problems. We implement algorithms. It's why is this not 100% accurate? Well, there's margins of error with anything.
Oh, yeah, all models are wrong. Some are useful, right?
Our human judgment is full of error.
Yeah. Your problem is a measurement problem, right? Which is, hey, I've got a clinical trial. I don't know the outcome a priori. I can't measure it on day 2. But hard expectation setting.
Yeah, so let's take one more, and then, okay, yeah, because...
Have you guys not heard enough about us? You want more?
I'm not sure you care to comment on using blockchain technology to allow people who own data to benefit from it, and it's.
I mean, first of all, I just came up with that business idea on the stage, so let's not put too much of like my thought to it. But
Actually, there is blockchain and security, so
I
there's a
think
lot of work on that already.
It's true.
But the adoption.
So I think the way blockchain, and there has been some experimentation done, and I was like slightly a part of one of those conversations, and it went a little bit ahead. But the blockchain is going to help when you have the participants in play all together working, right? So you have a provider, you have a payer, you have a pharma, you have a third party, all of them combined together and ready to move forward. It might be at a very small scale. So you'll see blockchain implement in things like supply chain, where it comes like the pharmacy of the world, like pharmacy distributions, all that. I think in healthcare, that is where I feel that's going to start. To get to a level where you get patients involved and then start sharing data across the board, it's going to take a while, because it's you have to look at data sharing between payers and providers as well. Is it like 100%? Like providers don't like, okay, you see all our data. That's not how it works.
But
right?
I think we should just ask our Corinium friends to invite us to Europe, because there's a lot of cool stuff happening in blockchain and healthcare in Europe. We can come and listen.
Yeah.
I mean, but I think that's one of the legit use cases for Web3, for blockchain in general, is sort of decentralized security, sort of the ownership, the ability to remain anonymized and still have longitudinal data connecting. I think it's important, but I guess the question is always legitimate use case versus Ponzi scheme,
Exactly,
and
I was
other
thinking
things. Like it's got a bad rap these days. But I think that we're all experimenting with it. Half of us are on like boards of companies that are trying to investigate this kind of stuff. There's a lot of existing things. It's just wheat from chaff. So we'll see what rises to the top. But I think you're dead on in terms of it's going to be a while before we connect these disparate, antiquated healthcare systems. I mean, you can get a prescription for like CAR-T gene therapy. You know how you get it? You get it with a fax. How weird is that? Like we've got some real
Paper,
problems to
we're going
overcome.
back to paper.
We're going back to paper. Like, we have real problems in the
Blockchain, we're
healthcare industry to overcome before we can. But like we need people to push. Right, so these are good things to do.
And getting people comfortable to understand what blockchain is, as far as capabilities, and how does it fit in within that, development framework as well. What are the benefits of bringing it in?
Another duty for a chief data and analytics officer. Figure out how you're going to teach people about this. I got to learn a lot more before I can help anyone else. I think one last question, and I think most of us are going to be around for a little bit, so if you want to chat with any of us who have questions that maybe we can answer, we're happy to do that. So please.
Question, but I had a few comments. So one is the panel addressed the topic of EULA, and the question is not whether someone has read EULA or not. We all pretend that we read it, right? The real question is, do you actually comprehend the EULA?
No.
No, me
You're
neither.
working for like a rhetorical answer, but I agree. You're right. That's the conditional question. It's important.
By legal minds, with an explicit purpose of being completely non-understandable, because the company doesn't want to get sued.
Right.
So that's the first question, or the first comment. The second comment is the business idea that one of the panelists had. So there were actually studies that people did. And in particular, one firm tried where people were willing to share their data for monetary value in return. And the study showed that people on the average earned less than $1 in 2 months of data sharing. So that idea will not make any money.
Well, I mean,
Interesting versus, financial.
Didn't make any money with can't make money. I mean, what is the value of a record, right? Let's do the econometrics. But you're right.
This idea isn't going to get funded.
As a data point, that's an interesting data point. But I'm defending an idea. I don't care. I mean, I just threw that out there, man. Like, don't hold me to it. But that's a good data point. That's
third comment.
No, but I think one of the things that we're doing in our research ventures arm is I've steered them. I said, listen, we can provide de-identified data sets. We can work on developing algorithms. I don't care if we have monetized algorithms. But until we can figure out how do we balance the investment from a nonprofit perspective with the payout and the sharing of the dollars, because we only reinvest when we can actually generate revenue above margin. So there's a really tricky balance, and so I'm just trying to steer our organization clear of the landmines in the near term, because there's way too much that we've got to figure out.
I mean,
That was money that person was owed, right?
Yeah.
If there's $2 on the ground, I still want that $2.
But I think another thing you said, Chris, is that if you're going to monetize algorithms, you're using my data. It
Yeah.
goes back to Eli, sort of, then you should have
Yeah.
sort of ROI back to the individual that provided that information.
Yes,
There
so-
has to be a pathway. And going
so-
back to the EULA, yes, we're all risk averse. Healthcare is very risk averse, so you're going to have those, the list of, language and attributions that the lawyers put in.
So let me make the third comment, and perhaps it will clarify. The reason privacy regulations are very hard to implement is because we ask people to share their data with other people or companies, and companies and people can't be trusted with data. But there are technologies coming to the fore now where computer programs can have trusted executions. And so therefore, it may become possible to trust computer programs with your data. And that is an interesting sort of area of technology. Blockchain is an example. I'm personally not interested in blockchain. But there are thousands of people who have trusted their monetary value to the Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies.
So you're saying like
it is
algorithms, just trusting, giving.
No.
I mean,
There are
those folks who are really
cryptographic
techie
guarantees.
have, I mean,
So
I've made
you have a
Cryptographic
technology
guarantees
solution.
can be
100
given.
machine learning models. I've driven hundreds of millions in value.
Yeah,
I don't have like an automated lock. I don't have cameras in my house.
Yeah.
I think
don't know.
I understand where
So
you're
trusted
going.
executions are
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
good point. I think that
Yeah.
if you have a technology that takes like your smartphone, which takes your data, de-identifies, send it to an algorithm where the algorithm executes with millions of other records, that is something people will
it
easily
should be
trust.
looked at. It should be looked at a little
I don't know,
more.
it's like human in
that's
the
the
middle
business
loops.
idea.
Right.
That's the
Yeah, I
Even
mean,
without flawed decision making.
I like that as well.
And that is called,
mean, the
that is
concept
called
of security-
federated AI and federated machine learning. And one final comment, this notion that data can be de-identified is a myth. There are lots and lots of
Re-identified pretty
papers.
It cannot
that
be
say-
it can happen 99.9%, can't
No,
be 100%.
in fact, 100% of the time,
Actually, there was a
data can
Princeton
be
study, it was a Harvard study,
can be
but-
re-identified.
Yeah.
Oh,
And
yeah?
there are
What's
all
your
sorts
age?
of things.
Like, let's try to re-identify all the people who are the same age. Like, I agree. I think there's a slippery slope there. Like, genetic data can never be anonymized for obvious reasons, right? But like, if we were to take the distribution of age in this room, and if anyone shares more than the same age, the probability that we can identify someone purely from an individual.
I think it's
statistic-
However,
more-
I think, Eli, that there was a study at MIT where somebody was able to take de-identified data set and re-identify.
Oh, I don't.
So
I
that's
don't-
pretty
I don't
easy.
disagree.
I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility. It has been done before.
But I think we need to like question whether or not
Why would
that
you do
level of identification, like what we're doing with it. Like, do we really need de-identification, or to your point, do we just need more trustful services or other things? Like, this data is
Just give it
useful
all to the
because
AI
it
to
is
monitor.
identified, right? Like, no physician could work with a patient if it wasn't identifiable, if we didn't know where they lived, if we couldn't contact them,
or their history,
or their history, like,
or
you
their
know,
social determinants.
a certain amount of this, I think, when we think about the safety, like, obviously there's diminishing returns, right? We don't want all of the information out there, but certainly, like, we need identifiability. That's a critical part of delivering healthcare. So,
Well, I think we've gone a little bit over, but I thank you guys for your patience, for your questions. Thank you to my fellow panelists.